Something quietly happened over the weekend that could end up telling us much more about where this team is headed than people realize. At first glance, it looks like a routine financial move, one of those off-season contract adjustments that fans scroll past without thinking twice. But if you look deeper, there may be a bigger message hidden behind it. And Steelers fans should pay attention because this move could impact not just one player, but the entire direction of the roster moving forward. I'll tell you all the details, so click the like button if you've been a fan for more than 25 years, and tell me in the comments, how long have you been a Steelers fan? We have fans of all ages, and that's fantastic. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers reached an agreement on a restructured contract with Pat Freiermuth heading into the 2026 season, and while most people hear the word restructure and immediately tune out, this one actually matters a lot. Because what this move really does is create flexibility. And flexibility in the NFL can suddenly become opportunity. Here's what we know. The exact financial details were not revealed, but the structure itself follows a familiar formula. Part of Pat Freiermuth's base salary for the upcoming season is converted into a signing bonus. That means money gets paid earlier to the player, while the cap hit gets spread across future seasons. For the Steelers, that's where things become interesting. The maximum potential savings from this move could reach approximately $5.2 million according to the information discussed in the report. That means Pittsburgh could potentially create significantly more room under the salary cap this season. Before this move, after the official Aaron Rodgers signing, the Steelers reportedly had around $3.1 million in available cap space. If the restructure reaches its maximum potential, Pittsburgh could suddenly be sitting around $3 million in available cap room. And that's where the questions begin. Because teams do not create additional financial flexibility for no reason. You don't suddenly move money around unless you're planning something, unless you're preparing for something, unless you want options. Maybe it's simply smart cap management. Maybe it's insurance. Maybe it's for a future move nobody sees coming. Or maybe this front office still isn't done. But before we even get there, let's talk about what this says regarding Pat Freiermuth himself, because I think there are two very important messages hidden here. The first one is confidence. This organization would not willingly increase future cap numbers if they weren't comfortable with the player long-term. By restructuring now, Pittsburgh is essentially saying they believe Pat Freiermuth is worth carrying larger cap hits later. And honestly, when you look at his production, it's easy to understand why. Over the last 2 seasons, Freiermuth has produced over 1,000 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. Those aren't empty numbers either. One thing that consistently stands out about his game is efficiency. He understands spacing. He understands how to attack zone coverage. He understands timing. Some players win through pure athleticism. Others win because they're smarter than the defense. Freiermuth falls into that second category. Watch him play, and you notice how often he finds soft spots in coverage. Watch him on third downs, and you'll notice how often he becomes a reliable target. Quarterbacks love players like that, because trust matters. And suddenly, another layer enters this conversation. Aaron Rodgers. Because according to the discussion surrounding the move, there already appears to be chemistry building there. That's important because Rodgers has always valued timing, precision, and players being exactly where they need to be. Not almost there, not close, exactly there. And Freiermuth fits that style extremely well. Then you add another factor that should catch Steelers fans' attention, the offensive system. Because the expectation being discussed is that this offensive structure could create opportunities for Freiermuth that simply weren't there before. Instead of being limited in a system prioritizing different looks, there's a growing feeling that he could become a much bigger focal point. And if that's true, Steelers fans might be watching the beginning of the biggest season of Pat Freiermuth's career. But here's where things start getting even more interesting. Because this restructure may not only be about Pat Freiermuth at all, it may be about what comes next. Because suddenly, Pittsburgh created room. And with room comes possibilities. Possibilities that could affect another position entirely. Possibilities that could change the offense. Possibilities that could bring another weapon into this team before camp even begins. And once rumors start connecting available veterans with Pittsburgh, things get very interesting very quickly. Before we continue, I want to hear from Steelers Nation. What do you think this move really means? Is this only about Pat Freiermuth, or is Omar Khan setting up another move behind the scenes? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Now, here's where this story takes a turn, because the moment Pittsburgh created more cap flexibility, attention immediately shifted toward another question. Are the Steelers still building this roster? Because according to the discussion from beat writer Chris Adamski, there is still a belief that Pittsburgh could add another veteran wide receiver before training camp. And when you start connecting the dots, you understand why some people think this possibility shouldn't be ignored. The argument is pretty straightforward. The Steelers wanted multiple reliable receiving options entering this season, and while there is excitement around younger talent, there are still questions surrounding experience and proven production. Experience becomes even more important when Aaron Rodgers enters the equation because Rodgers has always had preferences throughout his career. He values timing, he values precision, he values trust, and trust is earned. The report discussed how Rodgers tends to favor veteran receivers because veterans already understand route depth, timing concepts, and positioning. Quarterbacks like Rodgers don't want to hesitate for half a second, wondering whether someone will be where they're supposed to be. By the time that thought enters your head, the play is already over. The ball needs to come out. The receiver needs to be there. Simple. That's why suddenly, the possibility of another veteran entering this room became a conversation. Several names were brought into the discussion: Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Curtis Samuel, even the idea of versatile offensive weapons being used creatively. Now, before Steelers Nation loses its mind, it's important to understand something. This wasn't presented as Pittsburgh aggressively chasing a new starter. The bigger discussion was about adding depth, experience, and another trusted target if necessary. Because while there is excitement around the younger options, there are still unknowns. Jeremy Bernard was discussed as a player who could potentially earn trust quickly because of his route running ability and his understanding of finding openings against zone defenses. That's a trait that naturally stands out when you're talking about quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers. Roman Wilson was also viewed as someone who may look more comfortable in a more natural role. And then there is Caden Prather, who was mentioned as another younger option capable of surprising people. So this creates a fascinating situation. On one side, you have the argument that Pittsburgh should add one more veteran presence. On the other side, you have the argument that maybe this team already has enough pieces and simply needs those younger players to develop. And honestly, that's where things get interesting because, for the first time in several seasons, there appears to be actual confidence surrounding the wide receiver room. Think about that for a second. How many times recently have Steelers fans entered an offseason asking whether the receiving group was truly complete? How many times have fans felt like there was still something missing? Now suddenly, you have DK Metcalf leading the room, Michael Pittman Jr. being discussed as part of the group, younger receivers developing behind them, and Pat Freiermuth potentially stepping into a larger role. You start looking across the offense and something becomes obvious. Pieces are forming. Maybe not perfect pieces, maybe not superstar pieces at every position, but pieces that actually fit together. And that's why the contract restructure suddenly feels bigger than just numbers on paper. Because maybe this move wasn't only about saving money. Maybe it was about preparing for flexibility. Maybe it was about giving Pittsburgh options if something unexpected happens. Or maybe Omar Khan simply wanted to keep every possible door open before camp starts. Because championships aren't always built through giant headlines. Sometimes they're built through quiet moves nobody notices in June. And sometimes the move people ignore today becomes the move everyone talks about later. Now I want to throw it over to Steelers Nation, because this is where things get really interesting. If Pittsburgh makes one more move before camp, what position should it be? Wide receiver? Linebacker? Somewhere else entirely? Drop your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us, because Steelers off-season stories are only getting started. Here we go, Steelers.